All right. Hello, everyone. Everyone enjoying your Thursday morning here at Charleston? Yay. Right. So today we are going to be talking about awareness-informed action, empowering collaborative collections building. My name is Todd Carpenter. I'm the Executive Director of NISO, the National Information Standards Organization. We have four friendly faces up here, and you'll notice a slight variation between the four friendly faces. Unfortunately, Jill Morris couldn't join us this morning. She's not feeling well. But thank you, Sebastian Hammer, for joining us. He's founder and president of Index Data. Also joining us are Boaz Nadef-Menes, who is... I always get this wrong. You're University librarian. I always want to say dean, but I always know that's not right. At Lehigh University Library, and Gail Beckett, who is executive director at the International ISSN Center, or the ISSN International Center. It's been a rough morning. So, what we're going to talk about today is the Collaborative Collections Lifecycle project. This is a multi-year project that NISO has been organized in partnership with PALC and with Lehigh University. We're going to talk a little bit about some background information about the project, a little update on how things are going with the development of the NISO Recommended Practice, which is part of that project, kind of a deep dive into one of the 8 different subgroups that are underway, and then talk about the prototyping work that the project has got underway. All of this is thanks in large part to the Institute for Museum and Library Services, our friends in Washington. Deep shout out to them for their support of this project, and hopes that all is well down in Washington with them. So, what is the Collaborative Collections Lifecycle project? It is a project involving more than 70 different people from somewhere north of 50 different institutions, representing libraries, consortium, publishers, aggregators, service providers, all sorts of partners relevant to the entire lifecycle of managing collections. And what we're trying to do with this project is to redefine ways in which libraries can collaborate and work together to manage collections and in a collaborative way in our community. We're trying to develop not only recommended practice about how institutions and organizations can best collaborate, but also developing some prototype technical infrastructure, some middleware that can help support that interchange of information and support collaborative collections. The conversations that led to the CCLP project started out in 2019. The first phase of the project was funded by IMLS back in the funding started in 2022 for a 3-year project. And we've put in a proposal to fund a phase 2, hopefully with the continuation of IMLS and funding for this project after 2025. So, we're trying to facilitate library-centered community conversations to deploy both the recommended practice, some middleware tools, and other resources to enable responsible development, stewardship, and management of collections at scale across institutions. We're focusing in this initial phase of the project on prospective collections development, but we are thinking much more broadly about the entire life cycle of managing collections and how institutions can do that in a collaborative way. We've also added a little bit of focus on occasional optional collections, say in areas of immediate need, and how organizations can work together for say, emergency action, collective action. And as I said, we're focusing on this entire life cycle from what items exist in the marketplace that libraries could collect. How do you select those? How do you gather data for making decisions about that? How do you discover, circulate, and manage and share access to the content that has been required across institutions? How do you gather and collect data about those collections, and how are they used, and how do you iteratively develop the collection? How do you look at your collection and manage it in a retrospective or from a preservation perspective? So it's this entire life cycle, and we're only looking, well, we're focusing attention on certain elements of this entire life cycle. Recognizing that it's an initial 3-year project, we can't boil the ocean, we're trying to do as much as we can. Where can we make the most impact in the immediate area? So that's why we're focusing on this prospective collections and acquisitions element of this process, but we want to put it in a much larger context. So within the first couple of years of the project, we've obviously gotten the money from IMLS, and we've put forward a new work item. That project was approved by NISO. We've gotten a variety of subgroups working forward. We've established community governance. We started to do some research, and Boaz is going to talk a little bit more about some of the actual outputs that we've had to date. And modeling these workflows, modeling how organizations work together to build out a recommended practice around how to support collaborative collections lifecycle, and then start work on the development of some of the prototyping middleware tools. So obviously, collaboration amongst institutions is challenging, it's difficult, but how do we overcome those barriers? We've done some research in partnership with ITHAKA S+R to identify some of those barriers, to explore how to best overcome them. And then we're in the process of defining and articulating a recommended practice. We'll talk a lot more about that soon. And we're also a significant part of this project is simply to advance a community conversation around these issues. How can we support the community in being more effective, working across institutions? And that's where we stand in terms of the first phase and where we stand with our goals. And now I'm going to pass it over to Boaz to get into a little bit more detail about some of the things that we have underway. Boaz?
Thank you. Hello, everybody. I'm Boaz. I'm the University Librarian in Lehigh University Library. Been an honor to be part of this project. It's been sort of 20 years now that I'm thinking about those things or working on them. So this is really, really exciting. And thank you for NISO and Palsy for being a PI, and everybody here that is involved somehow or know about it or want to participate, please do and support it, because it's awesome. And like it can really make a change, I think, in library work in general. So because, like going to what Todd talked about, like this is a huge scope. Obviously, like we can start somewhere and end somewhere else. And we wanted to focus as much as possible on deliverables, things that we can do to make it all work out. So focusing on acquisitions, on selection, seem to be like the highest priority for our group, because this is, in our mind, a gap that we want to be looking at. And thinking about, like the life cycle, as you saw this picture, like we thought that retrospective data can help us to look at prospective decision making. So lots of ideas and ways to do that. A component of this project is the research component that we subcontracted or working with ITHAKA S+R. ITHAKA S+R is not just doing research for us for this project. I'll talk a little bit more about that, but also participating regularly on our steering committee, helping us to kind of think about what type of governance we can have for like such a big project. Because it's an ISO project, and because by definition, the best way to go about those things is to do cross-industry cross-sector discussions, how to be most efficient, to make sure that, like we get the data we need, everybody gets what they need, and we all collaborate in such a way that really will make a difference. We want to make sure that the research is there as well. So we are looking at different, ITHAKA S+R helped us to look at 10 case studies across library and a little bit beyond the library world, just to kind of see, like what other things are similar, what other consortia are running their business in what way, other things that we want to be taking from those good organizations and plug them into this work, make the most out of the success of others. So, as you see here, the ITHAKA research team, Tracy Bergstrom, Oya Rieger, and Roger Schoenfeld were helping us to work on those key elements. So this is like the report is out there. And we're happy about it. It's already, you can download it and read some of the outcomes. It was interesting. I think the work for ITHAKA was in-person dialogues with people working in those organizations, but also, like kind of a survey element that, was utilized. So like example of a key finding, for community-based collaboration to thrive, initiative leaders must be able to inclusively address member perspectives while at the same time setting a coherent long-term strategy for the collective. So being part of, attempts to do collection development across institutions in the past. You really want to kind of think about buying across organizations, buying across units, buying on the individual level, and that being aligned with the overall structure, the infrastructure to support that is a key. Without that alignment is really hard to get, and we see it as a community-driven project because it really is requiring all of our participants to buy in, to think that this is a good idea. Periodic and iterative review of collaboration is important so that if necessary, they can be sunsetted if they are no longer meeting institution needs. So, sure, you're all being on some collaborative projects and other things that, kind of keep on going because that's the way we go. And that's lovely, but the report here tries to hint in such words that it's good to review again. Are we still meeting the goals that we were setting to go for? And how often do we do that? And who is involved in kind of looking at those things on a long run? So that applies to many organizations, I'm sure libraries and other places as well as for local libraries. So check the report. It's really awesome. So this is one side of the CCLP work. The main kind of work is based on working groups. We have now 7 that are all kind of representing a function in the collection life cycle. So like a little bit like a persona, in a marketing kind of agenda. So we have an acquisitions working group, an assessment data analysis working group, cataloging and metadata, collection development and selection, consortia, infrastructure, organizational strategy and governance. So, and our main focus is people coming to those working groups with knowledge they know. So if they were participating in a collaborative work, they can share information about what they've learned, what they've discovered. So it's not just necessarily a research project, like kind of examining others and what they do. We want it to be grounded in reality. So the people that are working on those working groups are adding value, insights from their own experiences, what worked, what didn't work, what can be improved. So the main purpose is to identify gaps, barriers, and recommended practices, opportunities for collaborative collections activities within our scope for the phase of this project. And as we said, just a few minutes ago, it is really about buying as well. Like if we have groups of experts from those 50 organizations that are keen on making a difference and coming up with new ways, new collaborative standards, new collaborative infrastructures to support us doing it at scale, it's going to be just amazing. So this is like kind of the sections that all the working groups are kind of looking at. So looking at collaborative models, terminology is a big key for us all because those working groups, you can imagine, talk differently about the same thing, or like they have a different idea what one thing that one working group is saying means to another working group. And that's like in one library, you take it to like many libraries wanting to do something together, or many organizations wanting to do something together. So like a key facet of this working group kind of type of work is also to identify terminologies that we want to be sharing so we can talk the same language when it comes to collaborative work. This can be across acquisition, selection, and metadata and all of those key things. And additional facets, identify barriers, challenges, specify the person's roles, infrastructure and data needs. So all those things are kind of, and the working groups kind of start where they feel comfortable and go from there. And we have around 55 pages now that, like coming from all those working groups for like a recommended practice. And, there's going to be a lot of editing coming in a few months, trying to kind of put it all together in such a way that it's consumable as one thing with highlights from particular perspectives from those working groups. So here's a highlight. The intersection of an awareness of the possible collections landscape, what is possible to collect, and an awareness of the goals, commitments, intentions, and holdings of others in the same ecosystem. So that was kind of a big takeaway. It's not necessarily good enough to think about holdings or to think about, like the resource sharing or circulation statistics or like things like that. We were thinking awareness means many things. It can mean an intent to select, an intent to buy, an intent to collaborate, an intent to be aligned with your organizational strategy. So we're focusing, and I think more than just maybe a few weeks ago even, on intent. If we have individuals working in different libraries, what do they intend to do when they select an item? And we're thinking that this is going to be an essential piece of what we may be able to do later. So here is like a chart of like what, this is from Bill. Bill, are you here from NYU? No. Okay. Hey, Jane. So that's part of like the intellectual kind of work that is involved in those working groups, is kind of trying to focus on what are local decisions, what are potentially collaborative decisions, what are the core, what are the pieces of this collaborative work that is at that core, and where can we kind of build an infrastructure to kind of make all those things work better. So here is one output in the recommended practice. And like we're trying to kind of, because we're thinking about selection and acquisitions first, a lot of the work that is being done in the selection and collection development work is kind of furnishing the work for the next working groups. So this is like the way that it's formally being conceived. There's a challenge, a gap, and an opportunity. And we're gonna do that. So working group is a team of 10 people or so. And it's aligned with another. So what the working groups do is kind of compare notes. So if they have questions that they want to be asking other working groups, we keep, Keondra is helping us to keep kind of some of those good questions float. So each other, people on the working groups can learn from each other, can complete, can fill in gaps, can do all those things. And this is now a way for me to introduce Gael, because she will be talking about one working group, the metadata and data one, the cataloging one too. So, thank you.
Thank you. I'm very glad to be here, and I want to thank, of course, NISO, Palsy, and Lehigh University for inviting me to present today. I wanted just to specify that I'm one of the two co-chairs of this working group about cataloging and metadata. The other co-chair is Janet Norris from Yale University. So in our working group, actually, we are a team of 10 library professionals. We gather every 2 weeks online. And of course, during our session, we have approximately 1 hour sessions every 2 weeks. Kiandra is also participating from NISO. Our intent, or we attempt actually to work on the metadata that will be used by CCLP to actually perform what Boaz had just introduced to you, which is to cover or describe and cover all the activities or actions that will be performed during, the development of this collection or the collection development. The prototyping team actually considers the following metadata to be of interest in the framework of the project. Of course, bibliographic, descriptive metadata, but also metadata about the format, about holdings, what are the retention commitments and the digital entitlements, usage, interlibrary loan, but also circulation, electronic usage, and all information pertaining to the transaction. So at the moment, we focus on 4 types of metadata, and I want to emphasize the fact that actually it's a work in progress. So we are supposed to end or to give back our paper at the end of this year, but maybe we can get an extension if we need to, look a bit more into details. So with the colleagues on this working group, we identified some pain points. Of course, lack of metadata standards or common metadata standards between libraries, publishers, and aggregators at all stages of the collection's life cycle. Lack of standardization access point for publishers and distributors' name. Lack of accurate descriptive metadata for open access materials, issues regarding the uniqueness and the resolution of persistent identifiers, which are used for deduplication, for example, challenges regarding the accurate identification of materials formats, and especially technical specifications, and challenges regarding the tracking of serial title changes. So we are aware that these issues exist. So what we're trying to do is make recommendations that, there may be here avenues for developing new standards also. We're not going to develop standards in the framework of this project, but the idea is to have also some, perspectives on how these metadata can be improved. I'd like to quote here also, because I'm going to turn to descriptive metadata, challenges and recommendations. I'd like to quote a recent article by Levinson et al. And et al. Regarding shared print programs. This article is based on ILL data. It showed that there was an overall low rate of bibliographic inaccuracies between 0.1 and 0.5%. On a total of nearly 30,000 monographs reviewed that were exchanged via ILL. So I think it's an interesting finding because it shows that the bibliographic inaccuracy rarely prevents identification of the correct item and the fulfillment of the ILL request. So what we need to define within this project is the key or the core metadata elements that should be made available to uniquely identify the different types of materials. And this is also, I mean, our remit is also, our mission is also to list formats that should be handled by the system. Which type of metadata should be handled by the system, regardless of its operating model, be it holistic or distributed. We think that, you know, we don't want to be impressed by the myth of the perfect record, because also in this system, there will be data coming from different sources. So, of course, from libraries, but also from publishers, from vendors. So what we need to come up with is, let's say, a minimal core set of metadata that helps identifying the materials and not strive to create perfect metadata in the system. So what we identified also was that we want to identify uniquely so the materials, and we also want to be able to dedupe some records through, for example, the creation of controlled access points for publishers and imprints. We know that this is, you know, an issue in every library catalog, that actually the publishers and imprints come from what is written on the publication, and it would be great to be able to put some order in how these information, these data is actually dealt with. Another issue that we identified is the inconsistent and inadequate metadata for open access resources, because of course they sit with on various platforms, on various repositories. It's very complicated to find a single source, of course, of metadata for these materials. And because they are distributed, there are different standards used by the providers to describe these materials. So what we would like to recommend is to actually, for example, for repositories, to follow the COAR community framework for good practices in repositories. I don't know whether you're familiar with this recommendation. Regarding metadata, so it's a whole list of recommendations for OA materials. And they recommend the use of doubling core metadata and also harvesting in OAI PMH, among other recommendations. I'm really, you know, here it's a very brief summary of what's in this recommendation. Of course, there are also reliable sources of information. I think there was a presentation here by the director of the Directory of Open Access Books, Niels Stern. There exists also the Directory of Open Access Journals, DOAJ, and the Directory of Open Access Scholarly Resources. So there are sources for open access materials that can be tapped. Also, another issue that we identified was the complex, description of non-Western materials. Well, our recommendation would be to share expertise on scripts and languages at the consortium level to address these specific types of materials. Another type of metadata that we are dealing with in the course of our work with this working group is transactional metadata. And especially what metadata is required for a sound acquisition process. Because vendors offer libraries, purchasing systems, or acquisition platforms where libraries can search, select, and order new materials. But what we need is sufficient metadata to allow for a well-informed acquisition process. And so you have here on the screen a list of metadata that we would like to get to be able to follow up with the purchasing intent or the acquisition process itself. For example, more details on the digital licensing options, the types of OA models, is it a diamond, a green, or whatever? Are these materials shareable? Another aspect which is also important is whether these materials are protected by digital rights management systems. So is the material DRM free or DRM protected? That seems also an important, data or information to get through this, to perform this acquisition process. And another thing I would like to mention, and that will be my last word, is that, of course, we're going to come up with an appendix to our section of the recommended practice about formats, about also data formats, data models. And it's important to include in those formats or data models what the publishers can offer. So we work also with Onyx, having a look at what Onyx can provide as far as metadata is concerned. And it's important to have these models work together in this project. Sebastian, I think it's your turn. Thank you.
Hi, everybody. And thank you all for being here. I get to talk about the thing that we want to try to build. And I come from a background of having built software for and together with libraries for many, many years at this point as part of index data. I see CCLP existing very much in the same kind of universe as projects like Project Reshare and Folio as a way to leverage collaboration, to put new ideas into the world, to have a different way to talk together about vision and requirements other than RFPs, other than the types of internal conversations that take place in the shrinking number of vendors that operate in our space. I see this as a way to try to open up conversations. And in this case, I feel in many ways like CCLP is the most audacious of these types of efforts because we really were starting very deliberately with a blank slate. We didn't really feel like we were building a replica of something that already existed. We're trying to broaden the notion of what it means to work together to manage collection life cycles. So we very deliberately started with a really, really broad scope and tried to manage our mutual anxiety as we've navigated the past 18 months of just trying to figure out what are we actually building, what are we talking about here. And we started with a whiteboard that looked something like that. We had a notion, as Todd said, of different types of stakeholders that we wanted to support working together, all the way from selectors to publishers. We had an idea that there was going to be data involved, lots and lots and lots of data, and that we might have a conversation about how that data could be shared and aggregated. We might have a conversation about middleware that could support that sharing and aggregation. And we might have a conversation about what applications and features you'd want to build on it. So we were really trying to think less about building a product and more about building an ecosystem for collaboration, right? That both publishers and libraries and consortia and software developers could see themselves being part of. But the way we explored and tried to make that kind of vision more concrete was through an iterative user experience design process. So our way to give subject matter experts a voice in the conversation, a way to inspire conversations with developers and technologists and others was by defining and designing user interface prototypes. So we were lucky enough to get to work with Philip Jacobson, who's a good friend of mine and who worked with us on designing the user interface for Folio, for Project Reshare. He's worked with the Library of Congress on their cataloging infrastructure. He's worked with the Share project. Philip knows libraries, and he's comfortable with these types of somewhat diffuse collaborative projects and conversations that take place over a long period of time. And he's comfortable with the idea of exploring ideas collaborative through a design process. So Philip designed wireframes, and he brought those wireframes back to a group that I've been part of called the prototyping group that has been charged with trying to kind of interpret and see and imagine what we might do with those prototypes, with those designs, and then bring that conversation back out to the working groups. So we've come up with this concept ultimately. When we think about, to try to make it a little bit more concrete, I see the collaborative space we're trying to create as one that involves libraries working together on things like filters. You start with data coming from vendors, data coming from consortial partners in a group, data coming from individual library catalog and circulation systems. You want to be able to aggregate and look at that data as a whole. You want to be able to filter on that data to create lists of things that you are interested in for whatever purpose, whether it's acquisition of weeding, for area studies, a general collection. You want to be able to create filters, and from those filters you get lists. And those lists you want to be able to noodle with and extend and shorten and share with other people. So the notion of collaboration exists both at the level of these filters and these lists, right? And ultimately you want to be able to trigger actions. So an action to acquire something, to weed something, to move something to high density storage, you want to ultimately to have these list results in taking actions. And as Boaz said, we want to see those actions themselves as metadata that we can record and share. As Gael talked about, that the heart of this is metadata, right? So you can think of this in some ways. The most familiar way to think of this is we want to build a big aggregation of metadata that involves both our traditional catalog and holdings information, but also the information that's available from participating publishers or booksellers or other supply chain partners. We want to be able to associate that metadata, combine it together so we can see the overlap between what is held consortially, what has retention commitments, what is available for purchase, and look at that in a holistic way. So that gets us to the CCLC object, which is the type of thing that we would use our filters to create lists from. So the object becomes sort of the heart of the project. So that gets us to the kind of UX vision. And again, this is sort of really how we try to imagine a product built on this middleware, on this vision might look, right? So we have the idea of a list being created as an object that you can share. Over on the left-hand bar, you can assign some descriptive metadata to. You can set up a profile with the different types of data elements that Gael has talked about. And from that, you can see what is the list across this universe. Maybe I'm looking at a couple of libraries. Maybe I'm looking at an entire consortium. You may be looking at certain publishers or certain imprints. And you create a combined picture depending on what specific collaborative collection lifecycle management you're trying to do. This is really central to the vision. Once you've created a filter, it joins a collection of lists that you curate with your friends, and you can go and look at those lists. You can select from them. You can share them with other people again. You can edit those lists, add to them, or delete from them. When you look at an individual list, you will be able to see a set of matching titles, either the totality of the list or the things that have been added to the list by new things matching the filter for some time period. So the new publications, new things that have been added to your peers' collections and so on. And from that, you'll be able to go down and say, hey, I want to add this to the list. I want to make a purchasing decision or a weeding decision. And the last thing I just want to kind of squeeze in, and this refers to Boaz talked about the New York University work on trying to divide or segment decisions into tracks. And the notion that you might acquire something for a purpose, and that might be a shared vocabulary for talking about acquiring something either for long-term preservation, either because it's a special object for a special collection, or because it has something to do with a current activity. If we can think about vocabulary that we can share with our peers through some open means, it might actually help inform libraries in a consortium, in a collaborative group, make better decisions. So think about it almost as a pendant to retention commitments that are looking forward and saying, we're looking at acquiring certain things for certain purposes. And what sort of shared space can we have to talk about those purposes? So these are just a couple of highlights. And I have blown through our time for questions, but we all here, we invite everybody to become part of this, to engage. There's still lots and lots to do, and we hope to see the project continue in coming years. But hopefully it's given you a flavor, nudge of what might be the eventual outcome of these conversations that we've been having.
So, unfortunately, when you're talking about a huge project, 40 minutes just isn't enough time. But if anyone has any questions, please come join us. We're happy to talk now that the session is over. But thank you all for coming. Appreciate you. In the next couple months, there will be a public draft of the recommended practice. Please take a look at it. There'll be a public comment period, so please do engage in the project in that way. And thank you to our speakers and anyone who's a volunteer. Thank you. We couldn't have done this project without you. Enjoy the rest of the day.